My guest today was born in India in the roaring 20s of Anglo-Scottish parents. He did his first performance when he was at the tender age of 3 and has been making magic ever since. With a shriek of Araby, he's toured the world and visited virtually every country that you could possibly think of. He was also magic advisor to David Nixon and also to Paul Daniels for several years. I'm delighted to welcome Ali Bongo. Nice to see you, Ali. So how much of your early childhood do you actually remember?
Well, quite a lot, really. My childhood in India, you mean,
yes.
Really, yes, because it was very impressive on a young mind. It was, very exotic and all sorts of things. And even now, if I walk down somewhere in the streets of, say, Southall, the aromas all bring it back to me. It really
right.
is. India did have its own particular aroma, I should assure you. Yes, but no, I can see things in my mind's eye exactly how it was.
And
like
your father was stationed there?
Yeah, my dad was in the army. He was a British soldier in those days. He was stationed in a place called Trimblegerry, which is close to a town called Secunderabad, which is just north of Hyderabad. So it was right in the middle of India. I was born in Bangalore, but we moved there very soon after I was born. And so I can remember that very well. Yes, it was a military station. We were surrounded, mostly soldiers, but obviously there were lots of I mixed with Indians all the time because it seemed fairly natural. There was no worry about race relations in those days. It was quite a nice thing. We enjoyed ourselves.
Right. And a lot of the time you spent obviously entertaining themselves in those days. So
yes, because there was nothing much else to do.
Right.
No cinemas, no TV, no radio. In fact, it was amazing, really. And they used to run sort of concerts and parties and everything like that. And they had a regimental band, of course, to play, and they had lots of dances with fancy dress and so on. And so the first thing I got into show business was I was about 3.
Right.
And there was a series of sketches in a concert, and I always remember my mum making the costumes for it. And there was a sketch about a prison,
right? And
they made costumes out of khaki with the broad arrow, the government broad arrow stamped all over it, so it looked like prison costume. And all the ladies had long bloomers which showed beneath the skirts,
right.
And they were in bright sort of jewel colours, which was just for fun, of course, And I remember they sang a song, something about 11 more months and 10 more days we'll be out of the calaboose. It was an American song, but it sort of fitted the prison thing. And there was a song about the flies crawled up the window, da 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 dee. And I think that was a Jack Buchanan song at the time. And then then there was a sketch where there were a bunch of soldiers doing, I think, physical training, PT it was called in those days, not PE, and they were doing all their physical jerks, and I had to crawl onto the stage, and in one of the cracks in the floorboard was jammed a large key, like a church key with the hole in the top,
right.
The hole in the end, and in the hole were jammed about half a dozen red swan vestas matches, red-headed matches in those days, and in that was jammed a nail.
Okay.
And my job was I had a sort of piece of wood, a sort of wedge-shaped piece of wood. I was supposed to hit this nail,
right.
And that would make the matches explode. That was the idea.
The days before health and safety, I see.
Absolutely, yes. And so I crawled on, and I missed a couple of times,
right.
Like bash, and then finally hit the thing. And when it went bang, all the soldiers fell down dead. They'd been shot. So it was a blackout sketch, and it was very funny. And years later, of course, I tried this again to demonstrate the thing, and all the swan vestas have been emasculated and now pink,
right.
and they don't go bang at all. So it's time marches on and everything's much safer.
Right.
I'm sorry to say.
Yes. In addition to the shows that you did, there also had a number of parties which your father used to organise.
Yes. They used to dress up as all sorts of things. And of course, we had Christmas, and Christmas, of course, was not like Christmas here. It was there was no snow.
Right.
I remember we instead of a Christmas tree we had a mimosa tree where the presents were on.
Yeah.
So it was quite different. It was we had my father was a sergeant major, but we had 3 servants,
right.
A cook and like a boot boy and an ayah who looked after me as a child. My first language was not English because she spoke Tamil. She was from down south, and so I spoke a few words of Tamil. I've forgotten them now, but there was, and they used to bring us garlands of flowers to present us, on Christmas Day. It was amazing.
Do you think that the love of costumes came as a result of that?
Well, that was part of it. I mean, India is a very spectacular place, really, in terms of costume and the weddings and things. Ramsamis, I think they were called Ramsamis, and they used to be. You used to hear them, so I even loved the music. I got to get used to Indian music. It was quite exciting, really.
Right.
And then there were lots of other things we went to. My dad took me once to a durbar, which is like almost like a race meeting, but all the princes used to come because there were princes in those days. There were still some left in India, and I suppose what's the other Rajas and princes. There were lots of them, and they arrived on elephants, which was magnificent, and all the elephants were covered in sort of cloths painted, and I think some jewels on them as well.
Right.
And then there was one surprising one who came. It was the Nizam of Hyderabad.
Oh yes.
And he was the richest man in the world at the time, and he arrived in a little old black Ford car, a little wizened old man, and he was rich,
Yeah.
And they did things like horse races and tent pegging displays. You know what that is? Tent pegging is where they have lances, and there are pegs, tent pegs in the ground, and they have to with flags on, and they have to ride the horses and pick these up with the lance. Pick them up. So it was quite a thing.
Right.
And all sorts of riding things, acrobatics on horses, that sort of thing. That's what it was. Wonderful things, and it's.
It sowed the seeds for your love of show business then.
Well,
spectacular.
Absolutely. This was an exciting place, and the first thing, of course, was that I learned to read when I was very, very, very young.
How old were you?
I was about 5. I could read at the age of 5.
Right.
So my parents helped to teach me, because really there was nothing much else to do. We used to go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning and come home at 12 because it was too hot after that.
Sure.
So I learned to read, and I learned to read the Times of India, which was the local newspaper. We used to get other newspapers from England, but they used to come sort of the whole month's all in one sort of package, all stitched together, so they were like a book rather than a thing. Because I remember reading some of the cartoons of those days. Oh dear, I can't think of the names of them, but they were people would remember that they were really quite famous ones, and
not as controversial as cartoons of today.
Not really, no. Because later on I actually did cartoons myself.
Oh right, yes,
so,
absolutely.
I did drawings of cartoons, so that sort of inspired me. I suppose in that.
Right.
Anyway, so in the Times of India there was a children's column.
Yes.
And they gave away a couple of tricks. You see, naughty really, and these were the first 2 tricks I ever did.
Right.
And one was a trick with a matchbox, which worked very well. And since then I've done this. It sort of followed me around the rest of my life, because then later on I used to sell a similar trick in the magic shops where I worked. So and there was a trick with a sort of wood made like a paddle with 3 holes in it, and my father made me one of those, and I did that, and so and that was really how it all started.
Well, Ali, we're going to see a couple of tricks after the break, but for now, Ali Bongo, thank you very much. Welcome back. We're here with Ali Bongo, the magician's magician, and been talking about his time in India, and how your family really sort of started out with a lot of that. They sound quite colourful characters themselves.
Well, yes, my dad. My dad was a very tall man. He was a sergeant major, but he was called Lofty. You can imagine how tall he was, about 6'4", something like that. And my mother was, she was a lovable character, because she enjoyed, she was fun really, and we had lots of dinner parties and that sort of thing, which I didn't see too much of because I was quite young, but it was, all the other officers, and it's amazing. We actually mixed very much with the other officers and the captains and colonels and all that. Because we were sort of isolated in the middle of a big, foreign country really. Although it wasn't foreign then, it was British, but it was, we looked after ourselves really very much, and it was very interesting. I mean, there were all sorts of things that we didn't there were no fridges, so everything had to be cooked fresh. Everything had to be fresh. We made our own ice cream, with those one of those churny things,
Right.
and the iceman used to come round, with big blocks of ice and chunks off, and we put saltpeter in and then churn it up, and that made your ice cream. And there were weird things you can't, things which I still do occasionally, is when you put your slippers on in the morning, you tipped them out because there could be a scorpion inside, or a beetle or something like that.
Right.
You tipped them out, and there were on the bottom of the table in the dining room. On the legs there was like a double tin, like a inner tin and an outer tin, and it was sort of and you put water in the outer tin,
right,
and put it under the leg, and that was stop the ants crawling up the legs of the table and eating food. So I think there was some put paraffin as well into them, and to kill them off. But it was all sorts of things like that which we don't sort of get in
right,
a cold.
Well, there are quite a few inherent dangers in living in India. Of course.
There were snakes all over the place.
Right.
I remember there was a snake in the quarters where we lived. There were stone floors, and I remember them killing a snake inside one of the quarters. They killed it with hockey sticks,
right,
and then they poured sort of methylated spirits over the trail of the snake, really. And the idea was to kill the trail, I suppose, so that its mate wouldn't come in looking for his partner. You see, so that's what they said. I think that's a bit of a myth, really, but it did happen, And another snake story. Another time I came up against a snake was we were walking. In front of our house there was a sort of big green area called the Maidan, and then there were rocks in the distance, and there were jackals and hyenas in the rocks, but anyway, there was a mimosa tree, and underneath the mimosa tree there was a sort of looked like a piece of coloured paper. My mother went to pick it up and realised it was the skin from a snake which had just sloughed off, you see, and the snake was still there, so we ran and we had a little dog with us, and we actually beat the dog back to the house.
Nice.
But the soldiers used to also occasionally kill a snake, and then they used to bury it, and the ants used to eat all the flesh away,
right,
and leaving you a sort of very delicate skeleton, which was they dyed the bones, and it became a sort of strange necklace, which was very, very weird. There was a rather strange animal called a bandicoot, a sort of large rat type.
Right.
I remember one got stuck up my neighbour's drain pipe outside, so we had a heck of a job getting that out.
Right.
And then there was a mongoose, because mongoose,
right.
Mongoose.
Yeah.
Anyway, and they, of course, were the avowed enemies of snakes.
Okay.
And so we used to encourage them to come round the house.
Sure.
And in fact, we used to put bananas on our verandas, and we had a sort of a tame mongoose that came
right,
and had bananas.
The favourite nibble of a mongoose is a banana.
Yes, and because they used to have fight with the snakes, and they can jump straight up in the air. You see,
right?
They jump straight in the air. As the snake struck, they jumped up in the air and of course landed back on top of the snake. So that's how it was done. I saw it once. I saw it happen once. Extraordinary thing. And of course there were lots of other animals out there which were just peculiar to India, which was very interesting.
Your mother had a lucky escape with that snake that time, but not so lucky, I think, with the scorpion.
Well, yes, scorpions. Yes, I mean scorpions were quite frightening, actually,
right,
to a small kid. Really, they used to have battles with them. They used to put a ring of fire and two scorpions in the middle, and the scorpions used to fight like a cockfight, Indian version of a cockfight, you see. And they were big black ones, and they were all sorts of different sizes, and we had to be very careful. In fact, I always remember tipping my slippers out to make sure there was no scorpions and that sort of thing. I think I've said that before, haven't I?
It's a wise thing to do, though, absolutely. You still do that with your golden slippers, do you?
No, but my mum, the strange thing with scorpions, they used to hide in damp things, because it's so hot, and they wanted a bit of dampness, and they used to hide in the face flannel. In the bathroom there was a face flannel, and the one crept in the face flannel, and my mother picked the flannel off the hook, and it bit her. It stung Ron. It stung her. And this was very strange because one of our servants sent for a man who was good at curing scorpion bites,
right,
or stings, I should say, and
He wasn't a doctor.
No, he
this
wasn't
was
a doctor.
black magic.
He was just a man who knew about this. Like I suppose in Africa it would be a witch doctor. I don't know what they call him in India. A Jadoo, I suppose is the right name, which is the same for magician. Anyway, and he came in, and what he did was he had 2 straws, and not the plastic ones, real straws.
Okay.
And he stroked my mum's arm, and he stroked the pain had gone up from a wrist up to upper arm, you see, and he stroked it like, and the pain seemed to disappear, go back down the arm, and finally disappear, and it worked.
Right.
And I don't understand how it worked, and it started my interest in weird things like that, but I don't believe it for one moment. But
do you think it was all psychosomatic?
I think it's psychological in some way. He convinced her that she didn't feel pain anymore. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know.
But a great way of
it worked anyway.
Introducing that sort of concept. Absolutely.
I mean, years later, I got involved in a film where I was actually doing psychic surgery myself.
Oh.
And it was on an actor in Jonathan Creek, you see, and it was and the actor who was actually supposed to do it. He was the mystic man. He didn't had the hands for it, or didn't want to do it, or something. And so they called in a magician, and I had to make do what the psychic surgeons do. Apparently, produce make a sort of incision into the chest of this gentleman, and produce bits of gristle and bone, not bones, intestines, after this thing, and cured the person, and it was quite difficult because manipulating those sort of bits of greasy things are very difficult, even for a magician like me, But it looked very good on the take. Yes.
So what are your views on psychics then?
I'm very sceptical about all psychics and supernatural things. Yes, because the magicians have been going for probably longer than most of the religions of the world, in fact, and we've been looking for magic because it's our business, and we haven't really found anything that's real magic yet. So we're still looking, we still have an open mind about it, but you never know, something might turn up. I mean, some of the latest technological developments and medical things are pretty miraculous, but they're not miracles, they're natural, so that's what we believe, that everything is natural.
Right, but a lot can be achieved with the power of the mind, as you say, in your mother's case.
Absolutely, yes. I think the mind is manipulatable. Is that the right word? That's a good word. Manipulatable, yes. And it is manipulated. After all, we are being manipulated every day. We are made to do certain things every day. It's called advertising.
Absolutely, and a very important business that is.
Absolutely,
too.
Yes. Couldn't do without that, yes.
Obviously, India is an amazing country, and they're rich in culture, rich in performance and things like that, and a lot of street performers.
Oh, yes.
Did you see a number of those when you were growing up?
Well, I saw some, yes. I remember very clearly one group who came to entertain the troops. I mean, they were after money. It was just that sort of thing, like a street performer here, and there was several things they did. One was lying on the bed of nails,
right.
And then there was one man who lay down, and they didn't have naffy in those days. It was the company caterer. He was an Indian caterer who looked after things for the troops, and his van, I don't know how big it was, but quite a big van, drove over him. He drove over his chest, and he was okay afterwards. It was amazing, really. And then there was some. Oh, then they put stones on his chest, a big paving stone, and this was broken with hefty. Sledgehammer, that's right. So they broke it, and he was okay. And then there was a bit of fire eating, and then there was something which I think has led to a belief in the Indian rope trick a bit, because you see pictures of this and you think it looks like the Indian rope trick, and really was a tall pole, and they've got a little boy balanced on the top of it, and the man is holding the pole up in the air. That's right. So like a juggling or acrobatic thing, and it's if you see pictures of this, old photos, it might be something to do with the Indian rope trick. What wasn't? Years later, my dad's regiment the man in my dad's regiment actually they faked a sting of the Indian rope. I wasn't there then because that was done in Karachi after we'd left, but it was my dad was there, and they sort of faked this film of doing the Indian rope trick, somebody climbing out and vanishing and so on, and it was all a big fiddle, but
right.
yeah.
Of course the Magic Circle has put out an offer
Yes.
to people out the Indian rope trick.
Absolutely, yes. If you can really do the Indian rope trick, as is the history of it. See, I have a theory about Indian rope tricks.
Right.
I believe that this myth happens in many different countries. It's not just just India. I believe that in China or Japan, I'm not quite sure which one. There was a story about somebody climbing a beanstalk to heaven.
Right.
To steal peaches from heaven. That was the story. And then there's Jack and the Beanstalk in British folklore, and there's other things, and there's Jacob's Ladder in the Bible. It's all going up to heaven, right. Sort of thing, in some way or other, and that's what it led. I don't actually believe that anybody's actually done exactly what the Indian rope trick, although we have on the Paul Daniel show, we actually did it at Longleat,
right.
And it was at night, and in the background there was Longleat itself, illuminated, so you could see there was no fakery or anything like that, and the rope goes up in the air, and the boy climbs it, and Paul climbs up after it and slashes about with a scimitar, and bits of the boy fall down, right? As in the original story, and he vanishes. Of course, first of all he climbs up and vanishes, and then Paul climbs up and slashes about in the air with the knife, and down the bits come, the torso and so on, and they put these bits into a basket, and waves a magic wand, and out comes the boy whole again, which is the complete story, you see, which we did, using modern techniques, of course, and it was a very effective thing. Even people that were in the park, they shouldn't have been there, they were fooled by it, so that was pretty good. That's probably the best representation of it that I think I've ever seen, really. There's been obviously other magicians in the past have tried to do it on stage, and of course you can do it on stage, right. With stage lighting, but to do it out in the open, and we had a little band there, Indian band, and a tiger tethered to the ground to give it atmosphere. It was great.
Excellent, absolutely. So from India, you came back to England.
That's right. Yes,
and you were based in London for a number of years.
Travel home through the Suez Canal,
right.
On a troop ship. I remember called the California. I had been back once before. We came home for a tour of duty for a year to Maidstone Barracks, and then went back again. But then this time I was travelling just with my mother. This time, because my father was left behind in Karachi to do another tour of duty there, and I remember the ship. Because I was all over the place. I was a very naughty boy, really. I was into everything to see what was going. I saw some of the Jadoo Wallahs on the ship, and they used to throw things overboard, and boys used to dive after them, all that stuff, and I remember going up the Suez Canal. I remember seeing the pyramids, and that was very interesting, and some camels and things like that. It was great, really. And because the first time I came home, my father actually took me. I must have been very, very quite young. He took me to Port Said. We got off and we walked to the markets and saw some people performing there. So it was a very exciting life, really, as a kid.
Excellent. And your first memories of London when you arrived in this massive city?
Well, we actually lived in a place called Hymes Park near Chingford. And I went to school at Woodford Green School, and one of the things was that continued my interest in magic was I went to a friend's birthday party, and somebody had given him a box of tricks. And this was the first time I'd seen sort of magic was available for sale. The other people made tricks, and so I commandeered that box of tricks. I was into it and found out what it was all about.
Do you remember what was in the box of tricks?
Not really now, but boxes of tricks do tend to be the same. So I guess there was a thing called a ball vase, which was a little sort of vase with a cap on top with a ball that vanishes from that. I'm sure that was in there, and those sort of things they don't change changed very much, because they are the standard equipment for box of tricks.
Right.
And of course I had a lot to do with boxes of tricks later on. When I worked in magic shops and Hamleys and so on, I had my own box of tricks.
Oh.
Ali Bongo's box of tricks, which was good, which I designed a few things which were a little bit different to the normal run of things, so that was good.
What sort of things?
Well, there was a trick with was a card with a picture of a snake in a basket, and you pulled the card out and somebody signed it, so you couldn't be changed, and then you took a piece of green string and tied a knot in it. See? When you turned the card over, the snake had a knot tied in his neck, in that picture, which is great. It was a version of an old trick, but it was a novel way of doing it.
Do you remember your first magician?
Yeah, I guess the first real magician I saw. I mean, I did see some Indians in the streets doing odd things, but the first real one was I was at school, and we had to pay a few annas to our schoolmaster for the man to come and demonstrate. I mean, I suppose that happens now. Magicians go to schools and so on. It's happening. I'm sure it's happening all the time. It certainly happens in America a great deal. You pay a few pennies, and in comes a magician to entertain you. Well, he came in, and he had it was a big table, and it was a covered table with big cloth, because his assistant was hidden behind it, and he sort of sat behind it and did things, out of sight. But the three tricks I remember very clearly. One was a cut and restored rope trick. There was a long piece of rope held by two people, and it wasn't the usual rope you see these days with magicians with that sort of wimpy stuff, which is soft cotton rope. It was the tough stuff,
Right.
A real hemp or whatever they make rope of, hemp I think it is, and it was cut, and then he tied a knot in it, and then they pulled on it, and it was restored. And I didn't know how it was done until many, many years later, when I worked in a magic shop, and I actually discovered what it was, and I actually sold the secret for a time. Yes,
Right.
the wherewithal to do it. So it was called the Conradi rope trick, because it was invented by a man called Conradi, who was German, and I guess this magician had actually been to Europe or had some sort of contact, because his tricks were Western tricks, as I found out later. They'd come from Europe. The second one he did was that I remember was he borrowed a coin, an anna or two annas or something from my teacher, and it was scratched with a mark so they would know it again.
Right.
And remembered the date, the usual thing, and then he vanished it in some way, I'm not quite sure. And then from behind the table came a big ball of twine, which was unwound. It wasn't wool. It's usually wool these days, but it was twine, and it unwound and seemed to go on forever. And inside that was a little tin, and inside that was another little tin. Inside that was another little tin. Inside that was the marked coin, which was the coin in what's called the coin in nester boxes,
Right.
Which many years later, when I was at school, about 10 or 11, I bought the coin in nester boxes from Elliston's, a famous place in High Holborn in those days. And you could, because it was advertised in the comics. Elliston's, you could get their catalogue and
Right.
send off for these wonderful tricks, and it was the same trick, and it was a coin in nester boxes, and I've still got bits of it actually, still in somewhere. And then the last trick he did was something which impressed me for many years. It was he had a goblet, a glass goblet with a metal stem, and he poured all sorts of gunge into it, like liquids and made a big thick black liquid thing, and he gave it to his assistant to keep mixing. And a little bit later he took it back again and dipped his finger in to show that it was sort of ink and nasty, and then he advanced towards my teacher, lady teacher, and he flung the whole lot over her. We all, wow, what an effect that was, and it changed instantly. All the black stuff disappeared. It changed into flower petals wet with dew,
Right.
it's sipbot, and it was just marvellous, And for years I worried about how that was done. I didn't know. I had some ideas which didn't turn out to be correct, because you couldn't do it surrounded, which this was surrounded. And later on, many years later, I was doing the Paul Daniels show, and we wanted to do a trick with. We found advertised a trick called ink to goldfish, which came from Vienna Magic in Austria, and It was called it's called Tinten Pokal, which was the ink goblet. And the idea was that you filled it with water filled it with ink rather, and then the ink changed to water with goldfish in. It's the same trick. It was exactly the same thing, and it was identical in design. And it was, I'm sure that the man had bought it originally because these things are still made. 150 years that have been made.
Right.
It's from now, in Hofstad's time, who was a famous magician at the time, and it was made in those days, and it still retains the exact method and the same design. So, and then later on, I was able to buy one for myself. So I've got one now, so I can do the trick I saw in India all those years ago.
Excellent.
And it's a wonderful piece of apparatus, old-fashioned,
Right.
of the period. But so now I know how all those tricks are done, and I've done them all.
Right.
You know.
But magic tricks, they seem to, as you say, resurrect every now
Yes,
and
they
again.
do,
Do you think there's anything new in magic?
Very little. Let's face it. It's like music. You've got 8 notes, and you've got to do what you can with those. It's like anything artistic. What's painting? It's putting stuff on thing to make a design. Nothing really is new in that respect. Nothing really. You have different materials, certainly, and different objects and different things to make things from, but magic. It does tend to use the same plots, the same things. There's a theory there's only about 7 possible tricks. You can make something appear, you make something disappear, you make something go from there to here, which is really making something disappear and appear over there. It's really difficult to actually pin them down. You can make things defy the law of gravity, defy natural laws. Something is like if you tear something up and restore it to its first form. That's really making the torn bits vanish and the restored bits appear. I suppose. So it can all be put into very simple language. Really, it's not. But it's what you do it with. You do it with different objects and different and also dress it up with. Jokes and dress it up with artistic movements, whatever. There's all sorts of ways you can make it look different, and that's what my job has been over the years with working with David Nixon and Paul Daniels, is to find ways of making old tricks look a little bit different, look new, and maybe sometimes using a different method which will fool even other magicians, which was great fun to do.
Right. You worked with, you mentioned David Nixon, and
yes.
You worked with David for 9 years.
9, yes, about 7, 8, 9. Yeah, right. I'm not quite sure. It was. I know I joined him. I think I joined him in 1970. I had by then. I had done my first TV show. My first TV show was in Germany. By then I'd built my act. I'd built the Shikra act, and I'd won a few prizes with it. The International Brotherhood of Magicians Challenge Shield I'd won, and that sort of thing. And it was because of that I had been invited to do tours in Germany. At the time, I was working in Hamleys as the manager of Hamleys Magic Department, and I kept on having to take time off. Finally, my boss said, you can't keep on having this time off. So I decided, it's now or never, and I became a full-time professional. And kept travelling to Germany on little tours. We had a group of us going round all the spa towns of Germany. Everything starting with Bad Zusselen, Bad Orb, all of them. And Baden-Baden, of course, was the main one. That was the first one. And these were wonderful places because they had a built-in audience. Really, they had wonderful theatres, Stadthalle and this sort of thing. And all the towns in Germany had these theatres where we could put shows on, and we one-night shows, and we travelled around, and with a group of us, there were magicians from Holland and Germany and Denmark, a very famous one from Denmark, Jorgen Samson, and a French magician, and so we travelled around, and we were a real cosmopolitan lot. One of my favourite memories is I'm in a car with a German and a Dutch, and Germany's driving the car, French guy and a Dutch guy, and so we sort of go to park, and the window is open, see, and so the driver says, Ali, Ferme das Window bitte, which is French and German and English all mixed out. Because we talked, it was great. It was wonderful. It was a great experience, really. So that happened. And then I did my first TV in the Schwarzwald, in the Black Forest. There was a TV station there, and we did a magic show. It was called Geschwindigkeit ist kein Hexerei. I'm not quite sure
Catchy.
what that means.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's right. I think witchcraft is not magic, or something like that. Just something, and it was great. It was all in black and white in those days.
Right.
But then I did my first TV show in England. Was the good old days, up in Leeds, City Varieties. It was I think 1965 with Tommy Trinder,
Right.
and that was very good. And then I saw David Nixon was going to change channels and go to Thames TV. So I wrote to him. I had some ideas for illusions, which I couldn't do because I wasn't an illusionist, and I wrote to him and said, "I've got some ideas." And the next thing, well, how I got the job really was that I had already been an advisor to Michael Jaston, if you remember him. He was in the Power Game, and he was going to play Dickens in a TV show about Dickens. Now Dickens was a magician. He was an amateur conjurer, So I had to teach Michael Jaston how to be a magician, so which we did. And so one day, David Nixon is at Bush House, the TV Bush House, the BBC Bush House, and he's standing next to Michael Jaston in the loo, and Michael Jaston mentions that I happen to be working with him, and
Right.
and that I was teaching him magic, and as a result of that, I got the job with David Nixon as his advisor.
Okay.
So and I stayed with him for quite a few years, and we did 85 shows, which is quite considerable, with all the people like Bob Monkhouse and
Right.
people like that as guest acts and guests from all over Europe. We had some wonderful magicians come to be part of the show, and that was great. Good. And I played Alistair. I was the idiot assistant, really. And at first I was in a sort of a flunky's costume, with a white wig and all that stuff. And I was very useful, really, because I could keep an eye on what was going on, and although that people didn't suspect me because I was such an idiot, But, and it was it was great. David Nixon was much taller than me, so I looked a midget by the side of him. He used to say things like, that Alistair, he's about as useful as an ashtray on a motorbike. So we had a lot of fun. It was great, and with Anita Harris, as our main assistant, it was wonderful. And the shows were really, really strong shows. They were very good, and we used to get about 20 million viewers on a Monday night, which was incredible in those days. Because then David unfortunately died, and I joined Paul Daniels at the BBC with John Fisher as the producer, and stayed there for about 13, 14, 15 years, something like that. Quite a long series that was.
You mentioned that whilst you were with David Nixon, you played the character of Alistair, which was a sort of a larger-than-life character. It was Royston Mayo was the director of those days, and it was his idea that I should be this guy. My first job, was David was going to go with an amphicat. An amphicat is a car that drives on water, and he was going to drive from one side of the Thames at Teddington Lock, you see, to the other side, you see, and I had to stand in water up to my knees with frogman's flippers on, sort of guiding him on this amphicat. That was my first job, and they left me there for about 40 minutes in the cold. But it was great fun. We had a lot of fun. It was, and then later on, they decided to upgrade me a bit, and I wore a sort of butler's costume, so a grey frock coat and tails and that sort of thing. It was quite fun. Yes. And how did the Shriek of Araby then develop?
Well, the Shriek had developed while I was working in Hamleys. That was already there, and that developed. How Ali Bongo started, you really want to know, because it was just after the war, and I left school and I joined a youth club in my village, which was Sutton Valence, near Maidstone in Kent, and a local youth club, and we wrote a pantomime. And it was nothing to do with any of the usual pantomimes. It was called Happening Pantomania, and it was a mixture of all sorts of things. So there was a ship, and there was cannibals and everything. It was a crazy idea. And I played the part of a a cook on board the ship, and I didn't do any magic in this, although I was already doing magic in children's shows as myself, and I had to play this character, and I decided that it would be an Oriental character with a fez,
Right.
and a name Ali was the right name, see, and I decided to make it Bongo, to rhyme with Pongo, because I sang a song in the playing. It was my name, and I did a sort of funny dance with the Oriental with all that sort of arm waving about.
Yeah.
It was my name is Ali Bongo, and I come from Pongo, Pong tiddly Pongo land, pom pom. Oh, I come from Pongo land, the land of ripe bananas, of cocoa nuts and little grass huts and sultans and sultanas, where there's magic and spells and the elephant dwells, and the umpas play on tom tom, where the banyans grow and the Ganges flow. That's the land that I come from. Pongo land, that land of mystery, where the monkeys climb the juja tree. Pongo land, oh that's the place for me, where the sands never grow, sands never grow, sands never grow cold. That's it. How about that? No, that's not bad for 50 odd years ago. Gosh. And so I got the name Ali Bongo in the pantomime, and I wore my father's white cricket trousers, and his regimental sash around my middle,
right.
red, which was red, and then a white shirt, and my mother's kimono, which was blue, she'd bought in India somewhere, and a fez. This was pre-Tommy Cooper, you understand,
right.
and I had a painted on moustache and a little beard like that, see?
Right.
And a green sequin bow tie, which anyway they certainly, and I got laughs, and I discovered I can make people laugh,
right.
Which is very unusual at that sort of age, just by being crazy, really. I remember the one stunt we did. We had a big cake. Remember, this is just after the war. It was
right.
very short. Everything was short, of saying foods and things. And we had a big cake because the play was written, the pantomime was written by the grocers, the local grocers who ran the club, you see, because they could provide the materials for the cake. A big cake, and the idea was to ice it. Well, you couldn't get icing sugar in those days, so I iced it with a tube of toothpaste. You see, like this. Then in a blackout, we switched the cake for one which was really iced with real icing, so we can eat it. So everybody's going, oh, so there we are. That was still part of it.
Yeah.
And I had to dash about with glasses of water, splashing them about, and I did a bit of the scenery painting. And I organised some of the special effects, so I was into all that. You see, I didn't do any magic in that. So I thought, well, why don't I do my magic in this costume, in this guise? See? So the next thing happens, I go in for a talent competition in the Corn Exchange in Maidstone. It was sort of just after the war, and so they were trying to raise money for war savings, all that stuff. And I won third prize. And I did an act where I did I did cartoons, lightning cartoons. I did one of Bevin, one of Attlee. No, was it Attlee? No, sorry, not Attlee. No, I did Bevin instead of Attlee, and I did Montgomery, General Montgomery, and Field Marshal Montgomery, I should say, and Churchill. See, to cover all the possible political things, you see, and I had an easel, and I did a trick where ink changed to confetti, which was derived from the trick I'd seen in India. So
right.
that was one of the tricks, and I did something with flowers producing and so on. I forget the others, and I won the third prize, which was a 5-shilling savings stamp, which I promptly lost, but it slipped down a crack in the floorboard, and my father and I had to spend half an hour trying to find it under the floorboards, and we lost the last bus home. So we had to walk home with all the props. So, but anyway, when I walked on stage as in this character, people laughed. Right. And it was the character, it was the funny look about it. So I thought, well, I'll stick with that name. So I kept the name. That's how I started Ali Bongo. It was lucky, and it has been very lucky to me ever since.
Excellent, excellent. And the Shriek of Araby came as following.
Yes, it was a build-up of that. You see, it was a build-up of that, and the costume changed slightly. Because Tommy Cooper became famous at that time wearing a fez, I changed mine to a turban with a fez. So it was a bit more Arabian Nightish.
You couldn't persuade Tommy to wear a turban instead.
No. But my costume was actually like something out of the Arabian Nights, which was not Arabian. It was not Turkish. It was a happy coat type thing, which was a Japanese, and the curly slippers could come from anywhere. It was just sort of mock Oriental, I have been accused of racialism, but would you believe it?
Oh, have you?
Yes, imitating, somebody from India, but it didn't belong to any particular country. It was a fancy.
But you in fact toured the world with this cat.
Absolutely, yes. That's shone all over at least 40 countries I've been to all around the world.
Any particular favourites?
Well, I love Japan. Japanese are very nice people, and they're very polite and very clean too. Everything is spotless out there. It's amazing. But I like America. Every nation has its own particular type of audience. Yeah. Americans are they're very extrovert. They want to be seen to be enjoying themselves, and they do. They're really good. The Chinese are different. They applaud. And then it's now show me something else. It's rather like that, and the Japanese vary a lot because there is the upper crust and the lower crust, and when you're working for a big company, it's all bows and very, but the younger people they really enjoy themselves. I did one show once it was in a nightclub, and it was a nightclub called the Crystal Room, a very unusual place, quite small. And it's covered in mirrors all round. So as you walk out, there's millions of Ali Bongos all over the place, and quite small and not very tall, because the Japanese are a bit shorter than most Europeans. Really, if you go on the subway in Tokyo, you stand, if you're a bit taller than most, you stand out, and especially if you're a European, they've all got black hair. So it's a sea of black heads, and you're standing at the back. It's amazing, really. I was out there once with some people from America who had a daughter who had blonde hair, and they all wanted to touch it because it was so unusual. Anyway, I digress. Where did I get to? I was talking about the Ali Bongo doing this.
Yes, and your world tour.
World tour. Yeah. I've been to Argentina and Chile and some quite extraordinary places, really. Behind the Iron Curtain, when there was an Iron Curtain, I went and worked in East Germany, in Dresden.
How did that come about?
Well, there was a friend from East Germany who got us booked into the Kulturpalast in Dresden, and a bunch of magicians. It was a magic show, and we went and we did. There was a Dutch, and there was German, and West German, East German, and French, I think, and we did the show, and it was a bit difficult because they paid you in East German Deutschmarks, which you couldn't take out. I mean, they're no use outside, so we had to spend them, and we had to buy things, and I bought sort of gold coins and stuff,
right.
And things like that. And a bit of a nice Dresden china, because that's the only way you could take it out. Even then, they could have confiscated that. Apparently, they didn't. But this is the weirdest thing. So as a result of that, I was invited back to Dresden to do a Christmas show, which was just me. I was the only magician, but there was 50 children dancing in a ballet thing, and singers and jugglers and that sort of thing. And I arrived in East Berlin. I flew into East Berlin. I was going to be picked up there in the car and taken to Dresden. And they said, have you any weapons? See, and I used to carry a starting pistol, because I used it in my act. And I used to have a magic wand, which fired a 9mm blank. It was a big bang. So they said, have you any weapons? He says, well, I tried to kid him, I didn't. So they took me into a room, very ominous. Ominous. And it might have been ominous, I don't know. And they opened the thing, you see, and on the top of my case was a joke machine gun. It's a toy, you turn the handle, it rattles. So I say, is this one you mean? I said, no, you have a weapon, a small gun. I tried to pretend I didn't really understand the Germans to help, I don't know. So they said, no, you have weapons. And so eventually, obviously, I had to tell them I had this 45mm blank starting pistol. You couldn't shoot anybody with it because it was all bunged up in the thing, especially for starting races. And so they saw this as wo sind die Platzpatronen? Where are the blanks? So I had a few sort of lying about in my makeup kit, and I said, well, no, you have a big lot. So they used to be hidden in the toes of my big slippers in a little yellow bag, you see. So they said to me, you have big slippers. I say, they know all about this. Somebody's told them.
Right.
And so they took the slippers away to be X-rayed. They couldn't find anything. So they come. I realised I have to take it out, and I showed them, and they said, this is not allowed. And where is the big thing goes bang? That big stick goes bang. And I had to show them that too,
Right.
and the bullets. So they said, well, this is not allowed. But I said, well, I have a government contract, because in those days it was all done through the government, and I've got to do the show. If I don't have these, I don't do the show. That's it, So they said, you must take them, and we must count them. And they counted them all, you see. And you've got to bring back the ones that when you've done them, you've got to for the fired blanks, you've got to count them when they go out as well as go. Oh boy, and it was very frightening actually. For an hour, I was shaking. I really was. I thought, oh dear, I'm going to be but it was okay in the end. But obviously, somebody in the first trip to Dresden, somebody had been through my stuff in the dressing room and found out where it all was. Must have been, and they told the secret police. Oh boy, I'm glad I've only had a couple of things like that, that happened to me with the gun. But now, of course, it's getting much more. It's not possible to take guns and travel with them. It is possible, but it's a lot of palaver, So I don't bother.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of traditional view is that boys get into magic because they're the nerdy boys who can't pull the girl, and it's a crutch. Is that one of the reasons you got into magic?
Well, no, not quite like that. But because I was interested in everything that goes on. Somebody gave me a book the other day from Leonardo da Vinci and said, you are a Renaissance man, because you tackle everything. And in fact, when I was a kid, I was into Leonardo da Vinci. I wanted to build one of those flying machines and jump off the roof. My parents wouldn't let me. I mean, I know why, but I really believed that those things could happen, and so that's the sort of interest I have. It's a general interest, but the magic, of course, was a vehicle for standing up in front of other people, and possibly it starts off as being cleverer than they are. You can do something they can't do, but in the end, it really is. Look, I'm being fun. I'm having fun, and why don't you have fun too? And it's an entertainment thing. And finally, of course, it becomes a means of earning a very comfortable living and enjoyable living, because you meet so many people. It really is a wonderful hobby for any kids. I mean, as you know, probably I have a lot to do with the Young Magicians Club, and these kids, they are very bright, and they are very polite, and you don't hear them swearing or behaving like kids do on the street. So it's a very good influence. It's a great hobby too, because you learn to use your hands in a totally different way to using tools and things. You're just making small gimmicky things which are delicate, and that's a good training for using your hands properly. Yeah,
absolutely. Throughout your life, you have been married to magic. It's been a consistent theme from the Roaring 20s when you first sort of started to that first show when you were just 3 years old. Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't think so. No, maybe the one regret is that I didn't start sooner to be a professional.
Younger than 3.
Well, no. I mean, I didn't start till I'd already been sort of 10 years in a magic shop and 4 years in Hamleys as a manager, and that was okay. That was very good for me. It taught me how to deal with people and taught me how to sell, which is always a useful accomplishment,
sure.
And but I really started really enjoying myself when I actually went out on the road and travelling around the world. I love travelling, and seeing different countries and things, because I was born in a different country. It was, I suppose that's what it is. I'm not. I don't feel very British. I feel European, if anything, But I'm someone who could be happy anywhere, really, right. Which is good.
And how would you like to be remembered?
As I don't know, as someone who was not terribly serious, but who invented a lot of magic for other people to use later on, and I don't know, as a character, as somebody fairly mad, I suppose. I mean, someone who is fairly serious deep down, but it can be looked on as a idiot.
Ali Bongo, thank you very much. Thank you.
The first trick I ever learnt, which was from the Times of India, the children's column I told you about. Well, this is what it was. You see, the idea is you put a matchbox on the back of your hand, and you wave your fingers at it, make a mystic pass, and the matchbox would stand up like that. That was the very first trick I did. But many years later, I was working in a magic shop, and I was actually selling a trick which did more or less the same thing. My life has sort of gone round in circles, magic circles, of course. And this is what the other version of it did. This is one I used to sell. A little matchbox that used to walk along by hand by itself. See, creeps and crawls on hand. It's weird. It's wonderful. It's 1 and 6pence. That's what I used to say over the loudspeaker at the front of the shop. And it used to stand up like this, and I used to wave your hand over like that, and it used to open up like that. And that was the acrobatic matchbox trick. It's just push it in like that, wiggle your fingers, and it comes right out like that. It's amazing, isn't it? Yes. That was the first trick I ever learned, really. This was the other trick that I learned from the Times of India children's column, and my father made this for me. Something about like this. It was much too big really for the thing, but there were no dimensions given. So anyway, little wooden baton, and the idea was you used a matchstick in those days, and you push the matchstick through the little holes. You see there are little holes there. There's one there and there's one there, so on. You can see it goes right through, and the idea is to put it in one hole like this, and then you wave it about in the air like this, and it jumps to the middle hole. See? It doesn't matter which one you put it in the end one there, it always jumps from the end one into the middle. That was it. That was the jumping matchstick or something like that. And it's a great little trick. It baffled me in those days, and I was very excited to do it. So that was my second trick. When I was at school in England for the first time at Woodford Green School, outside there was a man selling what he called Cartesian divers. Well, I learned they were called Cartesian divers. I have no idea whether they have anything to do with Descartes, but Cartesian divers they were called. And they were little sort of bubbles, little glass bubbles and things. And you put one in a bottle, and it would go up and down on command. Well, many years later, I bought these two little fellas in France, and they were sold in the streets, and they were called lutin. Le lutin is the little devil or the little goblin or something like that. And the idea is you put them in a bottle like this, and they will go up and down on command, just like that. Watch, here they go, see? And they go down and they come up, and you can have little races with them. And originally I saw these, they were used by a man selling horoscopes. And while the horoscope was developing, because they used a sort of chemical paper for them to develop on, while they were developing, these little things used to go up and down and keep the audience's attention while he did that. So that was the dancing little lieutenant. And sometimes if you wiggle your finger about, you can make them dance and twiddle about. They're wonderful little things, and that was a sort of scientific novelty which again attracted my attention and led me into paths where that other people don't follow.